everybody. Thank you so much for being with us this week for this edition of the Pro Football Weekly Chicago Bears podcast. I am the executive editor and general manager at Pro Football Weekly, Hub Arkush. I am joined by our managing editor, Arthur Arkush, and we are recently back from the better part of the week in Indianapolis at the NFL Scouting Combine. Got a chance to visit with both Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy down in Indianapolis last week. And Arthur, I don't think anything startling came out of either of those conversations. I'm not sure anything new really came out of either of those conversations. We do know that Ryan Pace has been busy going about the business of creating some more salary cap space for his ball club because it was a serious issue. They've redone the contract of Kyle Long. They've released Deion Sims. They've released Sam Acho. They still have some more work to do. Currently sitting with about $16 million in cap space, which is about 2.5 times what they had before Pace went to work on it, but still not leaving them in a great spot to go out and chase a bunch of free agents.
Yeah, you said it, Hub. I think the big news since we last, well, I don't even know if we call it big news, but the bigger developments since we last chatted with our podcast listeners were the release of Sam Acho and the setting of the salary cap, which is going to be at $188.2 million. It's a few million less than a lot of those sites, Spotrac and Over the Cap, had initially projected. So even after the move to cut Sam Acho saved $2 million, as you said, the Bears sitting at about $16 million. They've got room to operate with, but as we've been saying for months now, things are going to be tight. Hub, I think we should spend a minute though on Sam Acho because a big presence in the locker room, if not consistently on the field. The Bears NFLPA rep, he was on the committee of the social justice initiatives last year, so a guy who I think you could say probably had an even greater impact off the field, but will need to be, his replacement isn't on the roster right now, and it is creating another hole if the Bears aren't planning on bringing back Sam Acho at a reduced rate.
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, absolutely the Bears are losing what had been one of my favorite players that's ever been there. I actually tweeted shortly after the news that in better than 40 years on the beat, he is probably the brightest and one of the most impressive and pleasant players I've ever got to work with and cover. He's also a good outside linebacker. Nobody's pretending he's ever going to the Pro Bowl, but he is an all-effort guy. He did an excellent job. Was part of one of the top defenses in the NFL, and this is just a situation. It's not even a huge cap savings. It's about $1.7 million. But where it does get interesting is you talk about needing to replace him. Obviously, the starters at those positions are Khalil Mack and Leonard Floyd, and the Bears believe that with some youngsters like Isaiah Irving and Kylie Fitz that they've made a move to fill those spots. They had Aaron Lynch last year. Whether they can bring Aaron Lynch back or not, nobody knows. If, in fact, they are serious about Justin Houston, as some rumors have reported, although I don't know those to be true at all, they're looking at various ways to do it. But I find myself in a tough spot because there's few guys that I am more disappointed to see leave than Sam Acho. I wish he didn't have to go, but it probably is the wise cap move, the wise football move, and it's just a situation where you spend enough time in the league and you're not a must-have player and you're making more than the minimum, you're going to end up in a situation like this.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, neither of us were stunned to see the news. We had been sort of surmising it could happen, over the past month. So he was on our short list of players that were in jeopardy of either being restructured or released altogether. And therefore, for that reason, this isn't stunning. Maybe the void, the on-field void, if you will, is actually greater on special teams than it is on defense. I don't know about that, but Hub, I will say, what the Bears believe is one thing. I believe that going into next season with only Isaiah Irving and Kylie Fitz backing up their two Pro Bowl outside linebackers would be a big mistake. So when I mentioned that they now need to replace Sam Acho, I lumped together Sam Acho and Aaron Lynch. If we're to assume that both of those guys are departing, I absolutely believe they need to add a veteran pass rusher to this mix to better ensure their studs at the top. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and it will be interesting because this is, again, where the dilemma comes, Arthur. As much as I just hate to see Sam Acho go, if I have to pick between him and Aaron Lynch, I think Aaron Lynch probably has the ability to make the bigger impact for them at that position. Now, we don't know right now what the Bears are thinking about re-signing Lynch or what their chances of getting that done are either.
Right.
And then the other issue that we have to address is that, I think you touched on it, Sam Acho is not only the Chicago Bears player rep to the NFLPA, he is a member of the executive board of the NFLPA. He is extremely involved in union activities, and sometimes when you see that, you wonder if it had any impact on the decision to keep or replace him. In this case, I can say 100%. I'm sure it did not. I don't think that was an issue, but it does also leave a void there for the Bears as to which veteran player. It's not going to be a rookie, not going to be a second-year player. Which veteran player is going to step into that void, because the CBA does expire in 2 years after the 2020 season. It's going to be a big, big deal, and the Bears will need appropriate representation. And so from a player standpoint, not only are they losing one of their leaders, one of the better example setters in that locker room, they're going to have to find somebody to pick up the work that he's been doing on their behalf.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The first name that jumps into my head, I'm sure it does for you too, Sherrick McManus would seem like I don't know if he has any interest in being that guy, but such a well-spoken, sharp player, and it would seem to be sort of a natural guy to slide in there. But you mentioned Aaron Lynch and whether the Bears, what he can bring to the Bears as an outside linebacker versus Sam Acho, and I totally agree with you. I was actually stumbled on this yesterday. I was a little surprised. Aaron Lynch is a 5-year veteran. He's actually only going to be 26 years old. So he was relatively young entering the league. I know he's fought injuries and maybe a little bit of that underachieving label. But yeah, if it's between those two, I would think that Lynch has a lot stronger chance of returning. And now that being said, I'm just not sure either one of them are going to be back, because I think the Bears might go in a different direction. And we'll just have to wait and see. But I do think it becomes an area that must be addressed, and it sounds like we do agree on that.
We do. Arthur, and I've heard, actually, two things here. First of all, it's funny you say Sherrick McManus, and I can't argue with that as a good choice. But the first guy who pops into my mind, and it happens quickly, is Prince Amukamara. For the same reasons I think that you gave for Sherrick McManus. And certainly there are plenty of players on the football team that are capable of stepping into that role. I look over on the offensive side. I don't think that is Kyle Long's style, but I could see somebody like Charles Leno taking on that challenge. I could easily see Allen Robinson taking on a challenge like that. So it's not like they don't have qualified candidates. I think, as far as this idea of bringing Sam Acho back, it's not going to happen because the veteran minimum for him is about $1.1 million. It's about $1.05 million. You're talking literally about a $500,000 cap savings, and those are not the kind of moves that they're trying to make. So I think in this case, the Bears have decided it is time to move on from Acho. The other guy, it's interesting to me that should be part of this conversation but isn't, is Joel Ayibuniwe, because he's got the athletic skills to play the position. He was drafted to play inside. You've got Kwiatkowski there behind Roquan Smith and, of course, Danny Trevathan. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see Ayibuniwe get some time outside as well. I do know that the kind of organizational focus or structure, if you will, that Ryan Pace has been trying to put together is to get younger and more talented. And so, again, as disappointing as it is to me personally, and I know to a lot of Bears fans, I don't really see any circumstances under which Acho is likely to be back.
Yeah, he's 30 years old. He's coming off the torn pec, and up until, the weird part about this is prior to that disappointing finish last season with the injury in October, he was coming off his best year with the Bears. Actually had 3.5 sacks, led them outside linebackers in snaps, I believe, and maybe hurries too the year prior. So it was kind of starting to come on. With all that being said, like you said, I think cheaper labor is out there. We got to, it sounds crass when I put it that way, cheaper labor, but frankly, this is a business and that's what it is. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention how that there are going to be a lot of opportunities to bolster the front seven, of course, in this draft, even with only those 5 picks potentially. But I'm really curious to see what direction they go in on the veteran, more established side. I actually have a piece up at Pro Football Weekly today on some potential kind of injury bargains on the free agent side. I do have an outside linebacker in there He does come from the AFC West, but I will make listeners go check out the story to see the whole thing and kind of get my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and certainly it's big news for all the reasons that we've discussed, but the reality is that where the Chicago Bears sit right now, finding their number 3 or number 4 outside linebacker just isn't as important as finding their starting strong safety, their starting nickel corner, their place kicker, their starting punter, their long snapper. I mean, they've got some real issues to address on the first team before they can look at the second team. And so those are going to be the more interesting conversations, at least in the immediate future. Of course, I guess now people are starting to get upset with us for calling it the legal tampering period, although that's exactly what it is. The early negotiating period of free agency begins on Monday, or maybe it's Tuesday. Well, wait a minute, it's Saturday, actually. It's March 9th, whenever that is. We shall see.
I think it's March 11th, right, Hub? Because the new league year opens on
March 13th, the new league year. Yeah, you're right. It is March 11th. It's 48 hours before the new league year begins, and I believe that date is March 13th, so it will be March 11th, which is actually the beginning of, again, I'll switch to calling it the early negotiating period, which is a week from which is this coming Monday, not this coming Saturday. And the whole market took a huge shock yesterday when it became, I don't know if it's ever official, but it became clear the New York Giants are going to allow Landon Collins to test the free agent market. He is probably one of the top 10 defensive players in football right now. He is certainly in the conversation for the best safety in football right now. He is 25 years old, and he is going to definitely move that market, particularly when you realize that safety was the strongest position in free agency with Earl Thomas and Tyrann Mathieu and HaHa Clinton Dix and LaMarcus Joyner, all available out there, plus Adrian Amos. And so, it's really going to be intriguing to see what happens. The franchise value, the average of the 5 highest paid safeties in football right now is $11.05 million. The transition value, the average of the 10 highest paid safeties in football is $9.5 million right now. Clearly, all those safeties I just mentioned, including Adrian Amos, would hope to get in that $9 million a year range. I cannot fathom spending $9 million a year on Adrian Amos. If that is the going rate, I could see living with that. I'd be delighted to spend it on a Collins and maybe even a Mathieu. I'd be a little more concerned about the others. But I just, with this news, not that the Bears are suddenly in the Landon Collins hunt, I'm just hard-pressed to see the Bears re-signing Adrian Amos unless he comes at a bargain price of $5 or $6 million a year, which is going to be roughly half what these other top safeties are going to get.
Yeah, we're in agreement on the kind of the prices you're throwing out and how they would be in our estimation too rich for Adrian Amos. And I understand we're going to do a separate NFL Pro Football Weekly podcast after this, so I will save my Dave Gettleman shade for that podcast. But how ridiculous that Landon Collins is hitting the market, and how there's two ways to spin it. Yes, his talent and his availability will kind of increase expenses at the position overall. But I'm looking at it the other way. Landon Collins, a surprise addition. Eric Weddle, only a few hours after Collins gets released by the Ravens. He's still got plenty left in the tank. So the way I'm viewing this is that 2 more enticing safeties than Adrian Amos that we didn't know were going to be available as recently as 24 hours ago now are. And that's potentially going to take 2 teams that might have been in the Adrian Amos sweepstakes. The Adrian Amos sweepstakes, that sounds a little silly, but in the running for his services. Won't be anymore, and I think might actually increase his chances just a tad bit of coming back home.
Well, we'll see. Arthur, this is somewhere, and again, I guess it's more fitting for a PFW conversation as opposed to a Bears conversation, but I fully expected Eric Weddle to hit the market based on what I'd been hearing, in part with what was going on in Baltimore, but more than that, Eric Weddle is 34 years old, and so, now if you're talking about a 1-year fix or maybe a 2-year fix, you look at that would be kind of contrary to everything that Ryan Pace has done in free agency. So, unless they think they can draft another Eddie Jackson, or unless they think that Deion Bush or DeAndre Houston Carson just needs 1 more year, I don't really see Eric Weddle as much of a fit for the Bears.
Nor do I. My point was that he will appeal to a bunch of teams. The Kansas City Chiefs is a great example. Teams that are ready to compete but need a starting caliber, a Pro Bowl caliber safety in order to get over the hump. So my point was that teams, again, that might be in on Amos will instead turn their attention toward the likes of Collins and Weddle. And you're absolutely right. Weddle, 34 years old. He had a $9.25 million cap hit. But the guy never misses time. He is about as steady and about as reliable as really any player at the position in the league. So I think you look past the age concerns just a little bit when you have a unique circumstance like it is in the case of Weddle.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm a huge Eric Weddle fan. My problem is that at least once every second or third week, I still wake up with an Antrell Roll nightmare. So,
oh yeah, I hear you.
Although that's not a fair comparison because Roll had been banged up and injured quite a bit prior to the Bears being his last stop. As you point out, Eric Weddle has been Mr. Dependable. We're going to need to take a break, Arthur, but before we do, one more subject that I found kind of interesting at the Combine. Obviously, a ton of focus has been on running backs, and I'm not really sure why. As I wrote at ProFootballWeekly.com the other day, when I list the Bears' 5 greatest needs, running back doesn't come up until number 5. I understand the running game has to get better. I continue to be of the mind that Jordan Howard was more misused than underperforming last year. But what intrigued me was in listening to Ryan and to Matt Nagy last week, I got the impression that they may be starting to think the same way. I think they definitely want to add at the position, but there's two schools of thought here. Either you trade and move on from Jordan Howard and you plug somebody else in, or you've got one more year on Jordan Howard's rookie deal, you add to it looking for the answer and try and get more out of your ground game that way. And I came away from Indianapolis under the impression that second formula is the one that the Bears might be looking at.
Yeah, that makes two of us. There's just no sense in trading Jordan Howard right now while his value's down. I mean, if they really were earnestly considering it at this time last year, I get it. He's coming off his second consecutive 1,000-yard season. Right now, it just doesn't make sense. What's more interesting to me about this, our Greg Gabriel actually reported that teams were calling about Jordan Howard at the trade deadline last year. He was led to believe that one team might have been willing to offer even a third-rounder. So, obviously the Bears aren't getting that now for Howard, but it's just fascinating to me because, A, I think it speaks to what's happened to his value, but B, it speaks to the fact that, the Bears couldn't afford to be without Howard last year because they didn't have his replacement there in waiting, and they were in, obviously in a push to make the playoffs. So that part of it was really interesting to me. But I have little doubt that the Bears are certainly going to draft a running back or find someone they really like in undrafted college free agency, and they're going to push Jordan Howard. But I expect him to come back for his quote unquote walk year.
Well, Arthur, and to extend kind of that thought you just offered a little bit, they don't have his replacement now either. I mean, that's the problem. Right. I mean, you can't just let Jordan Howard go and say we're going to be okay. Even, probably, I think everybody agrees, other than Le'Veon Bell, who's not going to be a Bear, that the best running back in free agency is probably Tevin Coleman. Tevin Coleman has never been as good as Jordan Howard in his NFL career, and you don't know that he would give you any more. When you look at the draft, I agree, they're going to draft one. Maybe they'll draft 2, but you have no idea what you're getting. And you can't go into the season saying that Tariq Cohn is our starting running back, and you shouldn't go into the season saying Taquan Mizell's even on our roster. So I mean, the bottom line is that they are in no position to move on from Jordan Howard. And again, it was more interesting to me listening to Nagy than to Pace, but listening to the way that Matt talked about it, I think he gets that, and I think they definitely want a more explosive, different style running back. But when you look at the way NFL teams are getting it done right now, it would be to pair with Howard more than necessarily to replace him, at least in the short run, until you know if you've got a complete back.
There's another style of back than Jordan Howard Hub that's out there in free agency that I think is going to appeal to the Bears. I hate to keep teasing this story, but you should go check it out. He used to play for Matt Nagy I believe he is going to be on the Bears' radar. But I thought it was interesting, too. And listening to Matt Nagy talk at the Combine was actually pretty fun when we're so used to never hearing anything from anyone down there as far as team officials are concerned. But he made it pretty clear that he doesn't see a lot of the complete running backs in this draft. He says you're looking for guys in specialized roles, and so that, that Le'Veon Bell type of back out there who can be on the field on all three downs. If he is in this draft, he might go a little bit earlier because it doesn't seem like there's a great allotment of them.
Dan Mott here with us, our executive producer. Dan, I love the fact that Arthur tweets about Spencer Ware, but he doesn't want to mention him on the podcast. So that's okay. We'll see if that's what he was talking about or not. Guys, we have to take a very quick commercial break. We want to give our sponsors, our great sponsors, a chance to be heard from as we go to break. I also want to remind everybody the Pro Football Weekly 2019 NFL College Draft Guide is available now. It is the #1 seller at Amazon. If you want to go there, you can get free delivery if you're an Amazon Prime customer. If you want it for a couple bucks less, you can go to your local newsstands. It is on newsstands everywhere now, particularly at your favorite bookstore or Barnes & Noble. You can also get a copy by going to ProFootballWeekly.com. The one thing you can't afford to do if you love the draft is to not get a copy. It is the best work out there. It will break down all the running backs as well as all the top prospects at every position, and we hope that you will pick up your copy soon. Again, we've got more to come on our Pro Football Weekly Chicago Bears podcast, but first, this quick word from our great sponsors. Welcome back, everybody, to our Pro Football Weekly Chicago Bear podcast. Our thanks to our great sponsors. And a little bit of quick housekeeping here. You may notice Arthur finally made it out of the car and into the office, so the background, it could sound a little different to you. And if you are stuck looking at these awful Arkush mugs as well, you'll notice that there was a video adjustment made during the break. Our executive producer, Dan Mott, in his never-ending seek for perfection, which he'll never get as long as these are the faces he has to work with, has made some adjustments, so we've got a little different look, and we appreciate all of your patience. We do have a lot of fun getting to do this for you, and we appreciate you guys being with us to listen. And for those of you who are viewing, it never ceases to amaze me that anybody would want to look at me or us, but thank you. We do appreciate it. You got this great PFW in the background at least, so we've got that base covered. Arthur, we were talking about the Bears filling needs as we went to break, both filling needs via free agency, via the draft. We have said a sad but understanding goodbye to Sam Acho. We probably, even though it was a while back, Deion Sims is a good guy too. He just didn't make quite the impact on a lot of us that Sam Acho did, and that's why we spent as much time on it as we did. Sam's going to work again. He's too good a football player and too good a guy not to. The Bears are going to find additions at running back. I think there is no question about that. One of the other topics that kind of interests me is that the tight end class in this draft is very, very good at the top. And it has some depth to it. There's a chance that there could be a player sitting there in the third round at 87 that could be a real nice addition to the mix, with Trey Burton and Adam Shaheen. The Bears, no idea what they have in Adam Shaheen at this point. I don't think anybody's really focused on it, but Ryan Pace reiterated for us again, and he will as long as he's the GM of the Bears, that he will always try and go best player available in the draft, that sometimes when you've got similar grades on 2 or 3 players, you might lean a little bit towards a need. That would certainly suggest that tight end is a possibility at 87 for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be a really good draft class for them. I actually have my eyes on 2 already. LSU's Foster Moreau is a guy I like a lot, someone who tested right behind the 2 Iowa studs, Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson, in most of his workouts, most of his measurable workouts in Indianapolis. So that's one guy I would keep an eye on. He can play Y. He brings a lot as a blocker, and I think he has a lot of untapped potential as a receiver. And then another guy's Ole Miss's Dawson Knox brings some speed to the table. I think he has some blocking potential. So that's getting a little specific. But more to your point, I don't think there's any doubt. That's one of the holes that still needs to be plugged. That is one of the better avenues in the draft to find a really good player, potentially at pick number 87 or even later. And it's one of those positions that Ryan Pace has struggled a bit to capably fill. Really liked what he got from Trey Burton last year, I'm sure.
but now it's time to build on that and kind of look for a different type of player to complement him up.
Yeah, there's no question in my mind that T.J. Hawkinson's going in the first round, probably in the top 20 picks. I don't think there's any doubt that Noah Fant and Irv Smith from Alabama are going to go possibly late first, certainly no later than the first 10, 15 picks in the second round. But once you get through those three, there then is a bit of a drop-off, and there could be some very talented players still available for the Bears. I think we talked about the running backs prior to the break. I don't believe there's going to be a running back in the first round, Arthur. I know that a lot of people look at Josh Jacobs, and I'm hard-pressed to understand that, because Josh Jacobs is a guy who in 3 years at Alabama never rushed for more than 640 yards in a season. And at that same time, his backfield mate Damian Harrison had 2,000-yard seasons. Now, I get that Jacobs' measurables may be a little bit more impressive, that he may be more of a big chunk runner, although he averaged just 5.9 over his 3 seasons. Well, not just 5.9, that's an excellent average, but when you project it to Alabama and how dominant they are over everybody, it's not all that special for one of their running backs. You've got Miles Sanders from Penn State. You, of course, have David Montgomery from Iowa State, who everybody thought, or not everybody, many thought could be the first back off the board until he hung up a 4.63 in the 40 at the Combine. I think a lot of scouts were probably not surprised by that. Montgomery is not a burner. He'll have a chance to get into the 4.5s and probably will at his pro day. Those three, along with Darrell Henderson, are probably the top 4 backs on the board. It wouldn't be shocking if one or two of them was still there at 87. It would be a bit of a surprise. But after that, there's going to be a bunch of talented running backs that could be sitting there for the Bears at 87.
Yeah, no doubt. I would probably be a little surprised, unless it's Darrell Henderson, to see them use that pick at that position, just because we've seen Pace maximize his resources there. And obviously he doesn't have many of them in the draft, only 5 picks. The fewest in the NFL. So, but yeah, there's going to be plenty of options. I would kind of disagree with you a little bit on Josh Jacobs. I mean, Hub, you can make the same argument. Quinnen Williams wasn't really a factor at Alabama until last season, because he was behind guys like Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen, and the list goes on. So I don't have a problem with Josh Jacobs' kind of small sample size in terms of production. In fact, I view it as a positive, and I think a lot of teams will, because it just means he's going to have less mileage on the odometer, and at that position, maybe more than any, that should be viewed as a positive in my eyes.
Yeah, I'm not saying that Josh Jacobs is going to be a great NFL running back. I'm just talking about as a first-round draft choice, and where I have to, we don't disagree, but where I would further the point relative to Quinnen Williams, maybe it wasn't until this year, but he was outstanding and dominant this year, whereas, again, Josh Jacobs rushed for 640 yards. It's extremely pedestrian, when you think about it. I get that he was sharing time, and yet Harris was every bit as more, if not a little bit more productive. So I'm not saying Josh Jacobs can't be a great NFL back. I'm just kind of surprised that as many analysts as they do have him as the number 1 back in this draft. When I look at the production from a Henderson or a Montgomery or even a Travion Williams at Texas A&M, I'm hard-pressed to understand what makes Jacobs so much of an easier choice for a lot of these analysts as those backs. But again, I don't dispute that he may turn out to be a fine NFL running back.
I think Jacobs and Miles Sanders, I guess all the guys we name, but that's why they're going to go earlier than before the Bears pick, are the few examples we talked before the break about kind of the complete back in this draft. Jacobs' numbers may not say that, but when you watch the film, this is a kid who looks like he can do it all. Again, the same holds true for a couple of these other guys. But, there's going to be plenty of good running backs once again, and the Bears are going to end up with one of them, and then it gets interesting, and we see how they're able to sort of carve out these different roles. Because one mistake would be trying to lessen what Tariq Cohen could bring to this ball club. Maybe they need to find new ways to sort of get the most out of him. But taking the football out of Tariq Cohen's hands, I think, is not something Matt Nagy wants to do, and that's something we know from the way he answered questions after the wild card defeat, when, of course, Cohen only got 3 touches. It sounded like Nagy's biggest regret.
All right, Arthur, one more topic before we break for this week. I got the impression from Ryan Pace, I don't know that Nagy talked about it, but Ryan Pace talked specifically about it, and I got the impression from him in Indy last week that he's a lot more impressed by Redford Jones than a lot of us are by the signing of the Bears' first player brought in to compete for the spot that's now been vacated by Cody Parkey. He talked about having 6 kickers in to work out. Jones, the only one not with some NFL experience, said that Jones absolutely crushed the workout and that there is a sound that comes when these guys have the ball hit their foot that you don't often hear, and he heard it from Redford Jones. I was under the impression that Jones was one of 2 rookies or unknowns that the Bears would bring in to compete along with at least one veteran. They're going to have competition. They're going to bring in another kicker to kick against Jones. But it sounded to me like Pace thinks he may have something in Redford Jones and that he is the presumptive front runner for that position even before they bring in anybody else to compete with him.
Yep, I heard it the same way as you. And Hub, I got to be honest to our listeners, I haven't went back and dug into Redford Jones's Tulane tape just yet. We'll try and add it to the list of guys we got to study. In all seriousness, no, I have no intentions of going back and watching Redford Jones's college tape, but Ryan Pace did sound optimistic. I actually had the great pleasure of chatting with an NFL general manager briefly one-on-one at the Combine last week, Tom Telesco of the Chargers. I'll be writing about it for later this week at Pro Football Weekly because I find so many parallels between the way they've handled their kicker situation, or maybe mishandled is the better term, and what the Bears have done. But what Telesco told me, and he finally stumbled onto Michael Badgley last year, the guy who was so great, the undrafted rookie who was so great in January for them. He just said it takes time. I asked him about the process of getting comfortable with your kicker. Telesco just replaced one after another. Of course, Josh Lambo, originally found by the Chargers. Now I believe he's the highest paid kicker in football with the Jaguars. So basically the big takeaway from Telesco is it just takes time. There's no shortcuts here in terms of getting to know a guy, in terms of becoming comfortable with him. And I guess I just mentioned that relative to Redford Jones because the more and more that this process goes on, the more and more that my thought process goes on, I really think I'm preferring the idea of getting someone young, getting someone homegrown, and then just having them in the building and being able to learn what makes them tick. I think that's the way you're going to get most comfortable rather than trying to kind of capture lightning in bottle with another veteran.
You know, Arthur, it is interesting and certainly worth noting. You look at Badgley and the LA Chargers, and you know he was the difference in that wild card win over the Ravens. He doesn't make all those kicks. They've got a problem as they struggled in the red zone. You look at the butt kicker, Harrison Butker in Kansas City. You look at Jason Myers with the Jets, who I believe was a Pro Bowler last year. Every one of these guys was more an accident than a plan, you know, and it is not.
Jake Elliott, too, Hub, the Lions local. Yep.
Yeah, it is not only not unusual in the NFL, it is the norm. That's the way that Robbie Gould happened that way. I mean, Robbie Gould was bouncing around, wasn't really viewed as an NFL kicker. The Bears made an in-season change. He was recommended. He'd already been released, I believed it was by the Ravens, and became the Bears' all-time leading scorer and is currently the second most accurate kicker in NFL history. So, yeah, you know, Cody Parkey, it's going to be a hard one for people to get away from, to put in their past, to forgive, to move on. But the reality is it's the nature of the position. And as we talk about all these positive options that the Bears could be looking at safety, at tight end, at running back, at cornerback, kicker, you got to pretty much, as Telesco told you got to just keep swinging. And, you know, eventually you find the right guy. It's often not something that you expected to happen. And so we should probably not turn our noses up at Redford Jones.
And, Hub, one thing I'll add to that, Tom also told me he loves Cody Parkey. That's a quote from him. He says he doesn't think Ryan Pace missed on Cody Parkey. Now, I didn't challenge Tom and ask him about his DVR listings and whether he caught the Today Show appearance and whether he knows a little bit more of the context of where things entered this downward spiral, of course. But he went out of his way when I mentioned Cody and started the parallels that I was seeing between the two. He said, we like him. We still like him. He's a good kicker, and he doesn't really view that as a miss by Ryan Pace. So whether that's like a misery loves company type deal among general managers or not, I'm not sure. But I found that to be interesting as well.
Sounds more like general managers who've struggled by letting go popular place kickers and then had a hard time replacing them. But it does speak to, Arthur, we talked about this a year ago. I was stunned that the Bears moved as quickly and as expensively as they did to sign Parkey at the time that they signed him and understood the accuracy, but he came with real questions about his range and about his ability to kick from outside the 50. And yet, what's interesting is that was the rap on Robbie Gould for the first, really 6, 7, 8 years of his career. And Robbie Gould is currently the most accurate kicker in the NFL history outside of 50 yards. He has made more 50-yard-plus field goals as a percentage than any kicker in the history of the game, and for years that was the rap on him. So, kickers have off years, and it may be, that it's more bad luck than bad scouting for the Bears and Cody Parkey. But I think everybody agrees that whatever the reason, or I shouldn't say the reason, whatever the background, the Bears did have to move on. And so I think it will probably be something that the Bears and their fans will spend less time worrying about as the offseason progresses. I think the real focus going forward now has to be on fixing the safety, the cornerback positions, getting some more help at tight end and running back.
Well, let's all hope that's true, Hub, because I feel like if we spend any more time discussing kickers on this podcast, we're going to have to go out and get Robbie Gould and Kevin Butler and have some type of podcast spinoff where we just discuss kickers. I don't think either of us really want to go down that road. So let's hope Ryan Pace can get this situated and we can move on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, I'm done unless Butthead has a grandson, because even his sons have now moved through the NFL. So, we'll see what happens with that. Guys, we've got to say goodbye for now. We're actually going to get ready to put the Pro Football Weekly NFL podcast together, but want to give our thanks to our executive producer, Dan Mott, of course, to all of our great sponsors. We want to remind you again, make sure you get your copy of the Pro Football Weekly 2019 NFL College Draft Guide. It is now available everywhere. Go to Amazon. If you have Prime, you can get free delivery. You can go to ProFootballWeekly.com, or you can go to your local newsstand, particularly your local bookstore, your Barnes & Noble. You'll find it there, actually a couple bucks cheaper. But make sure you get a copy of the Pro Football Weekly 2019 NFL College Draft Guide. We're going to say goodbye for this week, but hope you'll join us again next week on our Pro Football Weekly Chicago Bears podcast. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening.